So time will tell where the Buckeyes play next, when they will play next. But for right now, we welcome in Tony Gerdeman from BuckeyeHuddle.com. Gerd, thank you for joining us on College Ball Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
Here we are a few days removed from the loss in the game. As you look back on the film, does the loss sit any better, any worse, or what you felt Saturday night still what you feel now?
I don't think it can sit any better when you continue to see the fact that 5 touchdown plays accumulated or accounted for nearly 2/3 of Michigan's yards. And that involved breakdowns defensively, just simple mental errors, guys not being where they're supposed to be, not filling the right gap, or not keeping the correct coverage. So I think when you look at it like that, there's no way to really get over that other than to try to make sure it doesn't happen again. But they were trying to make sure that didn't happen in that game, and it still didn't. So I don't think there's any way to really get over that kind of thing when it's not like they were just beaten physically. They kind of gave the game away at points, and it's hard to accept that.
It seems almost as if Michigan used the Ohio State playbook and Ohio State was using the Michigan playbook when you look at the fact that Ohio State had to settle for 3 field goals and Michigan was a lot more creative offensively than Ohio State was on Saturday.
But that's kind of what Michigan does against Ohio State. They bring some creativity. Jim Tressel used to do that in his time at Ohio State, would bring some creativity to the Michigan game. But yeah, it's interesting too because Ohio State was running the ball well in the first half, and then they got away from that. And Michigan being a second half team, you would think you'd continue to do what worked, and they just didn't. And there's any number of breakdowns that could have been that were detrimental, but when you put them all together, it leads to a 3 touchdown loss at a time when Ohio State can't afford to be looking bad in the eyes of the committee.
Let's take a look at some of the key points of that game. I think you look at that early fourth quarter pass interference in the Michigan end zone, that if Ohio State doesn't call for PI there, that ball was going to be incomplete. Most likely Michigan settles for a field goal. You're looking at a 26-20 game instead of a 31-20 game. That one penalty, one of 9 penalties against Ohio State, I thought that was one of the key turning points in that fourth quarter. It seemed as if Ohio State had staunched a little bit of the Michigan momentum with 2 stops to begin that fourth quarter. And then on that 3rd and 10 play, you get the pass interference call.
Yeah, that was kind of the backbreaker. You're right. And the thing is, that was an uncatchable pass, but the way it was defended was too egregious not to throw a flag. Because if Ronnie Hickman wasn't there, there was nobody going to that catch was not going to be made. And then to have him just not seeing the ball and just basically running into the receiver, it's hard for the officials not to call that. But yeah, and then at that point, it's 1st and goal from the 2 or whatever, and I think that's when doubt and frustration really starts to boil over, and they give up the touchdown. And then, as you said, the 2 score lead. And what do you do there? That's when almost a little bit of panic sets in. And then, that's where the leadership is supposed to come in. That's where the quarterback is supposed to calm everybody down. That's where, and really none of that took place. And then Michigan gets the ball back and just runs right down the field. And just at that point, there are just a number of collapses along the way until the foundation finally broke and all heck broke loose there.
I mean, we can talk about those 5 explosive plays by Michigan, but I think another one of the key points is the fact that Ohio State only had 3 points in the second half, or you only have 1 field goal in that second half. They were leading at halftime, and the offense just could not do anything second half. Tip your cap to the Michigan secondary. They did a fantastic job. A couple of good plays by Mike Sandstrom knocking up potential touchdowns. But again, the offense struggles against Michigan for the 2nd year in a row.
Yeah, and you put up over 300 yards of total offense in the first half, and then half of that in the second half, and you can't capitalize on any of your good fortune, any field position. You're immediately committing penalties. You're losing field position. Really, really bizarre to see Ohio State held to just 3 points in one half. We don't see it often. I don't know when the last time we saw it from this squad, but that was a completely winning performance by Michigan in the second half in every facet. And just the Ohio State overall demeanor in the second half, offensively and defensively, I just think so much doubt crept in. But with Michigan stopping them the way they did, like how does it not, basically? And yeah, it didn't seem all of that dominating, but then you look at the numbers and 3 points, how can you deny it?
It certainly seems as if the momentum of this series has shifted back to Ann Arbor, much like in 2001. It shifted to Columbus. What can Ohio State do to make sure this isn't a 20-year reign of Michigan dominating the series?
I say make the plays that you're supposed to make, and don't. It's to say like don't let the game get too big, even though it's the biggest thing there is. Don't let the weight of that like crush you. I think Michigan came into this game loose and playing kind of with nothing to lose. Ohio State with much more pressure. We knew that going in that there was much more pressure on Ohio State than there was on Michigan, and I think finding a way to let the pressure motivate them, but not weigh them down, not just have them dragging with all of the weight like at the back of a Chevette with a ton of lumber on it, that sort of thing, and find a way to play through that, but also just make the plays that you're supposed to make. Follow through on the game plan, and you'll be surprised what happens. And don't make the mental errors. Don't headbutt somebody on the sideline on the same uh, uh, play where Ohio State is being flagged for holding on a play that got them to the Michigan 24-yard line. That ended up being like a 50-yard penalty from eliminating that play to the 25 yards of penalties, like that stuff. And then when you do that, don't then get into your feelings or don't now think, oh gosh, what are we going to do now? And because it's just a self-defeating, it's self-fulfilling. When you cause a problem, then you're like, oh no, now there are problems. It's hard to deal with that.
Well, moving on for the Ohio State Buckeyes, they will have a bowl game. It'll be a pretty good bowl game. We won't know for a few days yet what that bowl game will be. There certainly is a path to get into the college football playoffs. They certainly need some help. I don't know if Ohio State deserves that fourth seed, but if it's there, you're not going to turn it down.
They got to take 4 teams, and that's the good thing for Ohio State, because if USC loses and TCU loses, who deserves to go? And if they've got to take somebody, and so Ohio State's got as good of an argument as everybody else in that 3 through 5, 3 through 6 company. And it's happened years before where there's 3 teams that should go, or there's 2 teams that should go. And it's like, well, they got to fill out all the slots. And Washington gets to go one year, and a Lincoln Riley team gets to go another year. And so maybe this is Ohio State's turn should one of those 2 teams or both of those 2 teams lose. And Ohio State's not going to turn it down by any means.
I suppose the worst case scenario, it's similar to last year where you go to the Rose Bowl. Maybe you see Utah again. Maybe you see Washington in the Rose Bowl this year for the Buckeyes. So where does Ohio State, you just basically are playing the waiting game for the Buckeyes at this point?
Yeah, and I know I don't think Buckeye fans are all that excited about going to the Rose Bowl, and I think Ohio State knows that. And it'll be interesting to see if there's some inner workings to maybe can they go to a different bowl, something like that. And if you talk to Penn State would probably love to go to the Rose Bowl, and this is where the Ohio State and the Rose Bowl maybe try to match somebody up, like a matchmaker type of thing, because I don't think it's an expensive trip. And Buckeye fans aren't necessarily going to want to go out there and watch that. They'd probably rather see something much closer to home. Not that anything is going to be close to home, but
You don't think Ohio State's going to get the Quick Lane Bowl?
perhaps they could probably pull some strings and pay some money to get that done. But it's just a long trip out there, and the interest is going to be very low. And if the Rose Bowl is okay with that, then more power to them. But I don't see a lot of ticket packages being sold for that game.
All right, I want to thank our guest here on College Ball Weekly, Tony Gerdeman from the Buckeye Huddle, as the Ohio State's entering a long off season for the 2nd year in a row. Gerd, thank you very much.
Yep.